Fun.
The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Skash here again with my co-host, Mike Liskey, who's sitting in for Tulio today. And we've got a special guest who we'll introduce in a moment. We're going to talk today about empathy, and leadership conversations have been evolving. Employees and teams are asking for more clarity, more trust, more humanity from the people who lead them, and empathy has moved from being seen as the soft skill to kind of a core leadership capability, shaping how we communicate as leaders, make decisions and navigate pressure. And so today we are exploring the role of empathy in leadership, what it looks like in practice, and how leaders can integrate empathy into the way they show up every day without losing accountability or results. Mike, introduce our special guest today.
Oh, Steven, I am delighted to. And so with us today, our guest is Kim Gubera. Oh, wow. Steve, I think you might need to do the intro. Literally, my Google account just got signed out.
Perfect timing. Yeah, Kim is president and CEO of PIRTEK, where she leads the company's operations and franchise growth strategy. And with more than 20 years of franchising experience, she is passionate about strengthening the brand, supporting franchise owners, and aligning corporate teams around shared success. And since stepping into the CEO role in 2019, PIRTEK has expanded its footprint dramatically, growing unit count by more than 90% in just 5 years. And Kim began her career in accounting, earned her MBA, became a CPA, and previously rose to Director of Finance at US Lawns. She also holds the Certified Franchise Executive designation from the International Franchise Association. Kim, welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast.
Thanks very much, Steve and Mike. Really appreciate this opportunity. I love the subject that we're talking about because I think it's very important in leadership, especially in franchising.
Yeah, so Kim, empathy is, a word that gets used often, but sometimes, people have different definitions of what it means. When you think about empathy in leadership, how do you kind of define that? And then, when you think about what does it look like in action?
Yeah, well, being the good accountant and a rule follower, I did look it up just so I had the official definition because, it is quite intangible, I think. We practice it, but maybe we don't think about it in words. And so I guess it said it's the ability to understand and share the feelings of one another. I think it's just simply letting others know that you care. And I think that's really the way that I would sum it up quite simply.
Yeah, I agree. And so there's a lot of ways that in action kind of that shows up, right, from leaders. And to you, what comes to mind when you're thinking about the ways that you show empathy with who you're working with?
Yeah, there's several. I think that, I guess the immediate one that really happens frequently in franchising is when you have to maybe deliver a difficult message.
Yeah.
Also happens with employees, right? You can be so much more effective with whatever you're doing just by showing people that you care. I think a lot of times that's just listening and making sure that they feel that you respect what they've done, maybe especially in terms of franchising, what they've invested. And then when you are able to give them a reason, maybe why the answer is a no or not now, I think that's really super important anytime you're making any kind of decision. But it literally has to be something that's done daily and almost becomes not forced, but just natural. I do think that kind of is a skill over time, because I tend to be a person that if somebody tells me an issue or a problem, I'm like, okay, we could do this. And so you really have to stop, I think, and make sure you're listening all the way and not just providing a solution This is something I've had to really develop and probably continue to develop. The people that work for me would probably say still continue to develop, not being a doer, but just listening.
Yeah.
And then go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, no, I feel that too myself. Sometimes that pause you need sometimes. It's really, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no. So I think quite frankly, the truth is that being a leader is hard, or harder, because leaders are having to balance all these things from maintaining or keeping goals to meeting deadlines, and then even considering the needs of their team. And so I'm kind of curious, Kim, where have you seen perhaps leaders most commonly struggle with this point of empathy?
Well, I would say there's probably several ways, but the one that really I think I've experienced and I've had others experience, because you mentioned how much growth we've had as a company. We're moving pretty quick at a pretty quick clip, right? And I think busyness can get in the way of taking the time that's needed to really not only just listen to maybe what's going on with somebody, but just observe what's going on with somebody. Sometimes you can observe through behaviors, both with franchisees and employees, and say, this is not the norm for this person. What's going on here? And I think busyness really gets in the way. I also think that, there's been maybe a little bit of stigma in the past from a business perspective of the fact that empathy might make you weak, when in fact, I think it's just the opposite. Yep. So as much as I love being empathetic with franchise owners and employees, they would all tell you that I also have standards that I have to enforce. I mean, that's part of the franchise model. And it's how do you balance those? And I think by being able to balance those and having them both, I really think is what leads to a lot of success. So you can't be letting people do whatever they want. You also can't be enforcing standards to the point that you're not listening to what's actually happening.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And I think like our business system teaches us quite the opposite. Like you were saying, right? A leader needs to be strong in different ways, but quite frankly, they are strong when they are empathetic. I'm sort of curious, in your view, when a leader is not empathetic, what impact then does that have on their teams?
I think that I think of that a lot in terms of the franchisor-franchisee relationship, because you've got two business partners working maybe 1,000 or more miles apart, not seeing each other every day, and things go unsaid or unsettled. And over time, that can really build up to have resentment, being disgruntled. And it could happen with employees too. I think it's a little bit easier when you're seeing the employee on a regular. I tend to be quite observant. So I watch how people, do they show up to events? Do they go radio silent on you? These are kind of things that I think if you also have people that'll just explode over it. But what concerns me more are the people that don't say anything. And then it builds up over time. And quite frankly, we've had that in our system in the past, and we have to work really hard to make sure that doesn't inch its way back in.
Yeah, for sure. And eventually that has a financial impact, right? If somebody does shy away, like you said, it may even build up. They get disengaged from working as a team or the purpose. And then here you're have an employee, right, who's functioning at not 110%, and eventually that'll show up in the bottom line.
Yeah, it shows up, and not in a good way, because it's usually permeated a little bit in the organization by then. Also, I think with franchising, it can be litigious, and so you don't want to get to that point. You don't want the legal ramifications of the franchise agreement to be guiding the relationship at all. You want there to be, I say this a lot, mutual trust and mutual respect between the two parties. And that has to be established on day one and then nurtured so that if those pain points do happen, and this relationship is inherent for that, I'm asking 200 franchises that we're at 198, but I'll round up.
Yeah,
200 franchises to go in this direction when maybe 10 of them want to go that direction. And this is just a constant that if you don't have that foundation there, knowing that they know that you are a true empathetic leader, you're going to end up with challenges that you don't want.
Yeah, you mentioned the litigious nature sometimes. I've somewhere along the line, I learned a long time ago, you never want to end up a conversation where you're talking about the contract or something like that, right? Because it's 2 or 3 steps that have already failed in some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we say that in franchising. If you have to pull out the agreement, we've already hit a pain point.
Yeah, you're already in trouble, and you failed in a couple of areas probably.
Correct.
Kim, when you think about leaders who influence you the most, how do they demonstrate empathy, or how, maybe the opposite? Did that influence you in one way or another? Any leaders in your past?
Well, I think to your point, I've had good and bad examples. I a long time ago, I thought about this question because I was like, I don't want anybody that I worked for before watching this. About them. So
sure.
Probably, I'm going to age myself, 30 years ago, I had a boss that yelled at people. So like when things would go wrong, they would yell. And I always, just from that thing, I have always said, I will never yell at an employee. No matter how angry I am or mad or whatever. And that does happen, obviously, because we're only human. But so I've seen good examples and I've seen bad examples. I think a lot of my good examples I have seen in franchising because, again, that requires such a level of relationship above and beyond a written legal agreement to be effective, I believe. And so I've seen some really great examples of that and continue to see really great examples.
Yeah, thinking about the yelling leaders out there, I'm hoping they're becoming kind of dinosaurs, but I kind of don't believe it. But I think there's a point where just culture just will not accept it anymore.
Yeah, it's probably less accepted, but it's funny. We'll get people here because we've been growing pretty fast with our team, so we'll get a new employee and you hear some horror stories that you're like, really? That's still happening? Maybe it's not yelling, but maybe it's just more intimidation or just things I don't think that you'd expect. And I mean, I'm not saying we're perfect, but we do try very hard to focus on the soft skills as well.
Yeah. And so Kim, one of the things that you said earlier really struck me about, you're actually strong when you're empathetic, and mildness is really a strength. So I'm actually curious, what would your message be, say to those leaders who are out there that fear empathy because it might make them appear weak?
I mean, I think you just have to look at what you really want your organization to look like in the long run. And quite frankly, remove yourself a little bit. It's not just me, it's we. And even if 10 years from now, somebody says, oh, Kim Gubera, she wasn't that great of a leader. As long as I built a foundation here that I know is the right foundation and that I'm seeing the results of with our franchise owners and such, I can't be so focused on me. So I would say take a chance and sit down, and listen to what people are saying, primarily in the franchise space, to your franchisees. I think a lot of us do that with our employees because, again, they're right here. And I think sometimes franchisees get forgotten about. And not to get off in the weeds, but just when I became CEO in 2019 of a primarily male-dominated business at that time, we're no longer like that. We have, almost 30% female owners. Wow. However, I was a little concerned about that. Like, in this type of industrial business that we're in. And quite frankly, I was the first woman to ever lead a hydraulic company in the world. So I was concerned about that. We had some culture problems in our organization. And so because of those two things, I actually went and visited with every single one of our franchisees and asked them to tell me your PIRTEK story up to this point. Because I had not been, I was not with the company. I've been here for 10 years, but I was not here for the beginning. And they did. They told me the good and the bad and the ugly. And I saw anger, frustration, tears. And remember, these are primarily men that I was dealing with, mainly a lot of older men, because the franchise had been around for a while. And that just taught me so much. Number one, it taught me how much we needed to work on our culture, and primarily around listening. I went and saw people that had been in the system for 5 or more years, and no one had ever been there from the executive team to their location. And so I've tried to continue that as I go along. It's actually one of the things I enjoy the most, because that face-to-face time with them, that's where they feel the empathy. They're not going to necessarily, it does help now with Zoom, but over the phone, they may not hear it. But when you actually sit down in their location and say, wow, look what you've done here, and give them some positive about what they've done and invested in their business, and then listen to what all has happened. I've tried to continue that. Actually, I've done about 215 site visits. And I continue to do that just because I need them to have that somewhat face-to-face time. And I encourage my team, my senior team, to do the same.
Yeah.
So that's a great story. Thinking about it, so those site visits and the cultural problem, like you kind of sussed out from that, we like to talk on this show a lot about systems and building kindness into systems. And what I love about franchises is that, you can go out and you can find a problem like that. Now it's like, okay, how are we going to solve this? We've got to solve it on a systemic basis. So what did you do as far as, the systems or habits or practices to kind of help ensure that the empathy shows up consistently, among your teams and your franchisees and franchise, and the franchisor relationship?
Yeah, I think we did a lot of changes here at what we call the home office, right? We talked about internally what it means to truly support a franchisee. And also, I can't leave out the process, the back end of the process, which is I listen to all those things. They feel the empathy, but then I had to come home and do things differently. And so it was a lot about upgrading our skills and tools that we offered for them. And then they started over time seeing these changes. Oh, now we're getting this tool, we're getting that tool, we're getting this kind of support. And it's not that we didn't support them before, but it's just, it was very narrow in scope. And so we've really broadened that over the years. So I think empathy is one part, then you got to deliver. And so then going forward from that, you have to replicate both of those things over and over and over again with all of your team, right down to every level. Like, they've got to know, everybody here knows it's not acceptable to hang up on a franchisee or, curse at a franchisee or not answer an email. And the same thing's true for the franchisees. So I was actually able to then say to the franchisees, and you can't do that to our employees either, because that was happening, right? And so really it's just showing that to the entire organization, and then everybody feeling that psychological safety to know I can act like this and not be seen as weak or, old school or whatever, right? It really has permeated throughout the culture. And I do think one of our goals as a senior leaders is to make sure as we grow, we don't lose that.
Yeah, you make a good point too. We talked earlier about resentment. And so listening, but not acting, you're just going to end up being back in the same places as you were before. And they're kind of once you go there, they're kind of expecting to see some sort of action and follow up.
Yeah, you can't say, I'm sorry, we should have done better, and I care, and then not do all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. We often hear our marketing agency speak with both the campaigns that we create, but also in the relationships that we have with our clients, talk about make, love the goal, or make connection your goal. And so when we approach things that way, it really seems like whatever systems we set up kind of naturally or have that quality inherent in them, right? And so I'm sort of curious, because when pressures mount, certainly that's when systems can show or reveal their weaknesses. And so then I'm just sort of curious, Kim, how is it that leaders can design processes that then support empathy, right? Even when you have to have those difficult conversations or you're in these high pressure situations.
Well, that's a difficult question because there's just so many different factors to that. But this may sound very shallow. I hope it doesn't. But I think it's making sure that your team know we act this way. Like we have a set of values, and then we have a set of leadership principles and behaviors. And one of those behaviors is to work within our policies and procedures. One is to give 100% effort. And that's in the good days and the bad days. And so what I would say to that is making sure that whatever your process is, or your value, or your leadership principle and behavior, you're doing that even when it's hard. It's kind of like this saying, integrity is being honest when no one's looking. This is the same kind of principle. We have had in the past a franchisee, maybe they do go to an attorney. We don't cut off our support of that franchisee. And once we work through that problem with them, we keep on doing. And next time I see them, I act the exact same way. That getting right back on the horse kind of thing. And so you have to make sure that your team knows we haven't blacklisted anybody, or we don't cut them off because we're not happy with them. We're treating them the same, whether they're doing good that day or whether they're having a rough day. Same with employees, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because people will remember, at the end of the day, how you make them feel, right?
Oh, yeah.
They may not necessarily remember the conversation or what was said, but yeah, that feeling that they got.
Something I'd like to share if we have time is just, there have been a couple of, more than one instance where we were in the room with lawyers, with franchise owners, and we got out of that but without it blowing up, because we worked really hard to sit down with them one-on-one, sometimes more than once, to come to resolution. And some of those people today are our best franchisees with very good relationships with us. And so those are my success stories to say we actually did a whole 180 of where we were with this individual, and now look where we are today, right? I love those. I don't love the litigation part. Unfortunately, I didn't get a litigation. I don't love paying the lawyers, but if we can come back from that, that's a great story. And it's a story that I share with my senior leaders, because nothing's gone too far yet, usually, right? Where you can't try to claw back and make something good out of what could have been something bad.
And I do think that's a story of empathy too, because it is both sides wanting to sit down and see from the other side's perspective, this is why we, are doing this. And the other side might be, this is why I'm doing this. And you kind of go back and forth, but it is this process of empathy. You just hope, you get to there before you have the lawyer sitting down with you.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we have and going back to what we said was empathy, we have a shared goal with the franchisee. Franchisor and franchisee have a shared goal. And that's a big connection. If you can level up on that and leverage up on that, and our franchise network is very interconnected with each other. It's actually one of the great pluses of our system, I believe. And as a franchisor, sometimes franchisors will try not to promote that because it scares them. But if you have a solid system, you promote that relationship with each other because it just makes us all stronger. So then you see them practicing empathy with each other. And it's pretty amazing to see that. I mean, they work together a lot. You know, most years we give out an award called the Good Neighbor Award at our annual convention for people that go out of the way to help a neighbor, whether with labor or equipment or training. This is happening all the time within our system. And I really think it's one of the things that makes us great.
Yeah, I think that's the cultural shift is when it's, you know, not just Kim trying to push this boulder of, you know, but it's all your franchisees and everybody kind of buying into this sort of empathetic culture, right? Where they're helping each other out. That's just, I always say, instead of one person carrying the torch, now you've got, you know, in your case, maybe 198 people.
Yeah. It can't be a one-man show, that's for sure, because it's too large of a boulder, as you said, to try to push. That's why you need your team on, and you need, we call our franchisees and us Team PIRTEK. That's something we instituted a few years ago, and everybody's kind of on that, like including the employees of the franchise owners. So it becomes quite a large team, right? We're all trying to move in the same direction.
All right. Yeah, we've got
love to say too, like, so yeah, no, I'm just gonna make the point, right, that, you know, so many of life's problems can be solved through good communication if your goal at the end of the day is a good one, right? Not a selfish goal. But yeah, sorry, Steve, go ahead to the audience.
I was going to say, we've got an audience question here. Let's bring that up. So from LinkedIn, what advice can you share with women entering a very male-dominated industry about empathy?
It's a good question. I don't, and this is nothing against the question because it's a valid question, but I think step one is I try not to think of myself as a woman. When I'm dealing with them, I'm just an individual, a business person, right? And that is hard to do because, you know, sometimes you are the minority in the room. I think it's building credibility with them. First of all, they have to know that you're capable. And then the empathy comes right in with that. I don't think any of my franchise owners would say that I'm weak because there are times that you do have to be tough. You can still, there's a thing called tough love. I think you can be tough and still fair, but people know that I have high standards and I am very true to the brand standards. And they know I will say no, but I'll try to do that respectfully. It is, I think, easier today than it was. I've been around in business. Thank you for saying only 20 years in franchising, because it's longer than that. But I've been around business for a long time. It's a lot easier than it was a long time ago. And as I mentioned, I was concerned about it being a factor in this role change because I went from being CFO to CEO. And I can honestly say it never has been. So that's why I know there's been change. So I would say to this person, do what you know is right and aligns with your personal purpose. And I believe that that's the best result. Even if you don't get the result that you want in your current environment, if I can't get that result and have the freedom to do that in the current environment I'm in, then I'm not in the right current environment.
Yeah, it's certainly a striking point, right? To be able to do that. Then you got to make the decision, for yourself to continue to live by your standards and your values. So Kim, I wanted to transition maybe to a topic that we love, to talk about, here on this show, and certainly as an agency. I think Simon Sinek made it quite famous as to your, what's your why, and within the conscious capitalist principles, having a higher purpose, is one of the main pillars of conscious capitalism. And really just because purpose at the end of the day really shapes for leaders, even how they show up under pressure. And, if you sort of take a step back, from the daily responsibilities, and then you're just able to just sort of sit, there, what would you say the role is that purpose plays within your organization or within a organization?
I think it's everything. Now, purpose is there's a lot of different purposes, right?
Yeah.
I think if you have a purpose that's, I hope all my stakeholders aren't watching this, but if you have a purpose that's more than just money, I do think that you will have a deeper, better outcome. I do believe that, honestly.
For sure.
I also believe that you'll enjoy the journey more, because it is a journey. You said it earlier, leadership very hard. You have to make a lot of hard decisions. You carry a lot of weight with you every day. At least I do, because I take very seriously what I'm doing. And when those hard days come, I have to remember what my purpose is. And my purpose really is to whoever's in my realm of influence, that I am helping them become the best version of themselves. And that's franchisees and also employees. And so as long as I'm doing that, I do feel like that yields financial benefit and growth, because it's how we've built what we have built here. And so doesn't mean that I'm going to do what that person wants every time. They may question if it's really there, but I have to be able to look myself in the mirror every day. And as I said before, I have to be able to align what I'm doing with my values and my morals. That's always been very, very important to me. I am a person of faith, and so it does align with that. I wouldn't be somewhere that I couldn't do that, because I just don't think I could. I don't think I could function, and I don't think I'd be successful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it helps in so many ways, as you said, right?
It does. It helps when the rubber hits the road, right? And it's a hard situation. It also helps as a guide, I think, too, to go, since I want to do the best for people, it helps with decision making in those pivotal moments, right? And there are kind of moments of truth that happen.
Yeah.
And like I wouldn't worry about if they heard, where you made that choice of, every decision doesn't have to be like a financial necessarily one when you focus on purpose, but really the thing that it turns out is that when you do focus on purpose, it's often ends up being the most profitable approach to take.
Right.
So they do go hand in hand. And that's us as an agency. That's why we're always so focused on purpose, is because we know that's one of those ways you get that kind of emotional connection to show, throughout your organization and with your clients and your customers. And that's where you end up getting lifetime value increasing, so that, we always say it's like a 306% increase in lifetime value when you get that emotional connection. So that emotional kind of connection often ties back into that purpose of the organization. And
we vet our employees here very hard on that very thought process, because when we hire someone, say, to be a project manager, it's like, you're a project manager. Oh, and by the way, can you also help these other 200 small businesses with what they're doing and their purpose? And, some people don't want to do that, or if it's accounting or if it's IT, they just want to be in their space and help this one company. So everybody on our team, very committed. We hear that a lot, like, oh, this team's so committed. Well, we do a lot of heavy vetting on that, because we kind of say this is the expectation here.
Yeah, your people are your most valuable asset.
Yeah.
Yeah. What have you learned about integrating purpose and leadership into, the behaviors and culture? Obviously, it's like hiring the right people is one of the good places to start, right?
Yeah, I think consistent messaging is important, because you get busy. We're busy. We get in the busyness of it. I think, again, when those moments of truth happen, we don't deviate, right? We don't say, oh, we need to take a shortcut this time because it's a pain point. And I probably take bullets on that sometimes, because people are like, let's just do it the easy way. I'm like, no, we can't, And so people think it's maybe because I'm rigid, but really it's more about showing everyone on the team that this is what we say we're going to do. And now this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, Kim, one of the questions we ask a lot on this show is some form or variation of this. It's, what role does love play in business?
It's a interesting question. I read a lot about you guys online, so I was kind of somewhat prepared for this. And
we're asking CEOs, what role does love play in business?
I know. It is awkward. You know, it's awkward.
Yeah.
You can't go around and say to your employees or your franchisees that you love
Right.
them. But it is a form of love. And
Yeah.
I like to refer to the Greek word philia, which is about friendship type of love or acquaintance type love, where you have, again, a shared purpose. And you know, we spend a lot of time with our franchisees, and we spend a lot of time with each other here. We travel together. You know, how could you not, I guess, develop that kind of a deep relationship with people? There's franchisees that I supported in my old brand, that actually, one of them, it was a lawn company. They actually do our lawn care here, right? So I'm still connected with that owner. And a lot of people on my team that have come from other systems, they're highly connected with owners from other systems. So you really do develop pretty deep relationship. And then obviously the relationship with the people you work with. I still am very connected to a lot of people that I worked with at my other brand or that worked for me, who I give advice to and, you know, talk to kind of on a regular basis. That's love.
Yeah.
And I'll add, like early on, you mentioned, you know, how you'd be remembered, like if you would be, you know, remembered as a good leader or not. But really, when you focus on these systems that have this human touch to them, that's when you step away from it, that's where you're leaving this legacy that impacts people. And so, yeah, some of the things we were talking about, that is forms of love that will continue and carry on within your business. So you'll be leaving a mark. And, you know, the more you kind of audit toward like love or empathy or toward your company's purpose, your higher purpose, the more that legacy is left, the bigger the ripple effect you'll have on people who come in contact with your business.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I think organizations that, you know, lead with it or include it in the way that they operate are certainly the ones that, you know, garner a following that, you know, feels a very genuine connection with them for sure. Kim, as we're coming, you know, here close to the end of our show, for those that want to learn a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing, you know, where can they follow up? Where would you like them to learn a little bit more about PIRTEK?
Definitely PIRTEKUSA.com. You'll learn all about us and our franchisees and see our franchise network there. And then you can find me on LinkedIn.
You're going to have a celebration for franchise number 200 when that
We are actually.
comes on. All
We
right.
are actually. Yes, we are here at our office, and we're actually going to go to that location. So it's all very secretive right now as to who is number 200.
Who's gonna-
Ooh, where's it going to be? Where's it going to
Yeah.
be?
Yeah. You have
All
to be
right.
in the inner circle, I'm afraid, to know that.
All right, Kim, thank you for joining us today, you know, sharing your perspective on empathy and leadership. To our listeners, you know, thank you again for tuning in and your questions. And if you think about the show today, if there's one thing that you know, thought about, try and implement that. You know, we would love, you know, I'm sure Kim would love to have some kind of impact, you know, in your organization in a positive way. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.